I never imagined my life would change in the blink of an eye after 10 years of marriage. My husband and I had what I thought was a strong, loving relationship. We'd faced our ups and downs, like any couple, but I always believed we had a bond that couldn't be broken. I trusted him completely, or at least, I thought I did. It all started on an ordinary Friday night. He was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was unusual for him to leave his phone unattended, but I didn't think much of it until I saw the notification light up the screen. It was a text message, but not from any name I recognized. Just a random string of numbers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the phone. I shouldn't have, but something deep inside, maybe a gut instinct, told me to look. I opened the message, and my entire world crumbled before my eyes. The text wasn't innocent. It was explicit, filled with promises for the weekend, plans that didn't include me. My hands began to shake as I scrolled through the conversation, each message darker and more painful than the last. My heart raced as I pieced it together. My husband was having an affair. A deep, emotional, and physical relationship with a woman he'd been seeing for months, maybe even longer. The messages talked about meeting in hotels, secret dates, and how much he missed her. How did I not see the signs? How did I let this happen? As he stepped out of the shower, I froze. The phone was still in my hands, the incriminating messages open for him to see. My mind raced. Do I confront him now? Do I throw the phone at him and demand an explanation? Do I scream, cry, fall apart? But I couldn't move. I sat there, in complete shock, as he casually walked over, drying his hair, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I knew nothing in our life would ever be the same again. In that moment, a million thoughts flooded my mind. What should I do next? Should I walk away from 10 years of marriage just like that? Could I even confront him, knowing this betrayal was so deep? All I knew was that everything I believed about love, trust, and loyalty had shattered. And that was just the beginning. Chapter 2, Confrontation. The silence between us was deafening as he towel-dried his hair, completely oblivious to what I'd just discovered. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest, I thought he might hear it. The phone in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, its screen still glowing with the damning messages that had unraveled the life I thought we shared. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm, though every part of me wanted to scream. We need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, confused. What's wrong? He asked, concern creasing his brow as if he were genuinely clueless about the storm that was about to break. I didn't respond with words. There were no words that could sum up the betrayal. Instead, I handed him his phone, open to the messages that had shattered my world. His face drained of color as he took the phone, his eyes widening in horror as he scrolled through the same messages I had just read. He didn't say a word at first. I could see his mind racing, trying to come up with an excuse, a justification, anything that might explain this away. But there was no excuse that could make this right. How long? I finally asked, my voice trembling with emotion. How long have you been seeing her? He stood there, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. His eyes met mine, filled with guilt and shame, but not a single word came out of his mouth. That silence spoke volumes, more than any lie or explanation ever could. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. How long? I repeated, louder this time, anger rising within me like a wave about to crash. 6 months, he muttered, barely audible. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of sneaking around behind my back, of making plans with her while telling me he was working late or on business trips. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of my lungs. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw things. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the man I had loved for 10 years, the father of my children, and realized I didn't know him at all. Why? I finally asked, my voice cracking. Why would you do this to me? To us? He shook his head, still unable to look me in the eye. I don't know, he whispered. It just happened. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. It just happened? You're telling me that you didn't decide to betray me, to lie to my face for 6 months? That it just happened? He didn't answer. He couldn't. And in that moment, I realized something that broke my heart even more than the affair itself. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. Chapter 3, The Aftermath. The weight of his silence felt like a slow suffocation. My mind was racing with 1,000 questions, each one more painful than the last. How could he betray me for 6 months and still come home every night, pretending everything was fine? How could he look me in the eyes, kiss me goodbye, and go meet someone else? These thoughts tore at me, unraveling the fabric of the life I thought we shared. As the minutes ticked by, I realized I couldn't stay in this room with him any longer. I needed space, air, something to stop the suffocating feeling that had settled over my chest. I need you to leave, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. Now. He hesitated, as if he thought there was still some way to talk his way out of this. But the look in my eyes must have told him there was no going back. He grabbed a few things, still saying nothing, and left the room. The sound of the front door closing behind him felt like a distant echo as I stood there, alone with my thoughts and the suffocating silence that followed. I sank onto the bed we had shared for years, and let the tears come. I cried for the life I thought we had, for the trust that had been shattered, for the pain of realizing I had been living in a lie for half a year. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. It felt as if the person I knew, the man I had loved, had vanished, leaving a stranger in his place. For hours, I sat there, staring at the walls, replaying the last few months in my head. Every late night, every business trip, every time he had seemed distant or distracted, was she there? Had he been texting her while sitting next to me on the couch, pretending to be working? The realization that my entire reality had been twisted into something unrecognizable made my stomach churn with nausea. But as the hours passed and the tears finally slowed, something else crept in: resolve. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let him or her take away the strength I had built over the years, or the love I still had for myself. I had been blindsided, yes, but I wasn't going to let this be the end of me. I reached for my phone and typed a message to my best friend. She would understand. She always did. I needed her now more than ever, to talk through the mess that had become my life and to remind me that I wasn't alone in this nightmare. As I hit send, I realized that the path ahead of me would be one filled with difficult choices: whether to try to save my marriage, whether to walk away, how to face him again, and how to rebuild my life. But for the first time since I had opened that message, I felt a glimmer of strength. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I knew I wouldn't be walking it alone. Chapter 4, Facing the Truth. The morning came slowly, the daylight creeping through the curtains as if unsure it wanted to witness the aftermath of my broken heart. I had barely slept, the weight of everything pressing down on me like an invisible hand. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those texts again, the words that had shattered my world. But as the sunlight filled the room, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This was my new reality, and no matter how much I wished it wasn't, I had to face it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was my best friend, Sarah, replying to the late-night message I had sent her. "I'm coming over. We'll get through this together." Her words were like a lifeline. I needed her, needed someone who could help me make sense of the mess that my life had become. An hour later, Sarah was sitting on the couch beside me, her arms wrapped around me as I sobbed into her shoulder. She didn't say much, just let me cry, let me vent, let me spill every agonizing detail of the betrayal I had uncovered. When I had no more tears left to shed, she finally spoke. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said softly. "You're in shock, and that's normal. But whatever happens next, know that you're strong enough to handle it. You'll figure it out, one step at a time." Her words were comforting, but the truth was still heavy in my heart. Could I ever forgive him? Could I rebuild the trust that had been shattered so completely? Part of me wanted to believe that maybe we could fix this, that the love we had shared for 10 years wasn't just gone. But another part of me, larger and louder, was furious. How could he have done this to me? To us? "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I said finally, my voice raw from crying. "I don't even know where to start." Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to know right now. But one thing's for sure, you deserve better than this. Whether you choose to stay or leave, you deserve honesty and respect. He's the one who broke that, not you." She was right, of course. Deep down, I knew it. But knowing it didn't make the decision any easier. I wasn't ready to give up on my marriage, but I also wasn't sure I could ever look at him the same way again. The man I had trusted with my heart had shattered it, and I wasn't sure if that kind of break could ever be mended. By the time Sarah left, I felt a little stronger, a little more sure of myself. I wasn't ready to make any big decisions, but I knew I needed to talk to him again. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things left unsaid. He had to explain himself, to answer for what he had done. I wasn't sure what I wanted from that conversation: an apology, an explanation, or maybe just the closure I needed to move on, but I knew I couldn't move forward without it. When he texted me later that day, asking if we could talk, I knew it was time. Time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Chapter 5, The Conversation. The next day, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for him to come home. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your thoughts louder. The knot in my stomach tightened with every passing minute. I didn't know what I expected from this conversation, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The truth was already out in the open, but the damage it caused still needed to be confronted. When I heard the front door open, my heart skipped a beat. There he was, the man I had loved for so long, looking more like a stranger than the person I thought I knew. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with guilt, and the weight of what had happened was etched into every line of his expression. He sat down across from me, the silence between us thick and unbearable. Neither of us knew how to start. How do you even begin to address the kind of betrayal that leaves everything shattered? He finally broke the silence with a quiet, "I'm sorry." I wanted to scream at him, wanted to rage at the injustice of it all, but the anger that had consumed me yesterday was now mixed with something far more confusing: sadness. Deep, bone-aching sadness. "Sorry," I whispered, shaking my head. "You're sorry? What does that even mean? How can you be sorry after months of lying? Of sneaking around? Sorry doesn't fix this." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I never meant for it to happen," he said softly. "I didn't plan any of this. It just got out of control." The frustration bubbled to the surface. "It got out of control because you let it? You could have stopped at any point, but you didn't. You kept lying, kept seeing her. You chose this, and now you're telling me you didn't mean for it to happen." Tears filled his eyes, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I used to love. The man who would have done anything to protect me from pain. But now, that same man was the source of it. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I love you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Love me? You don't cheat on someone you love. You don't betray them like this. He reached out as if to touch my hand, but I pulled away. The pain was still too raw, too deep for any physical gesture to soften it. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice small. I wish I could take it all back. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed. You can't take it back, I said quietly. You can't undo what's been done. The question now is, where do we go from here? He looked at me, desperate and broken, but I couldn't feel pity for him. Not yet. This was my life that had been torn apart, my trust that had been shattered. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to decide if this marriage was even salvageable. What do you want, really? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Do you want this marriage? Or do you want her? He shook his head, as if even the thought of her didn't matter now. I want you. I don't care about her. It was a mistake, one I regret more than anything. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything he was saying. Part of me wanted to believe him, to hold on to the idea that this could be fixed. But another part of me was screaming that the trust was gone, and no amount of apologies could bring it back. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. He didn't respond right away, and I could see the weight of my words sinking in. I'll do whatever it takes, he said after a long pause. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I'll prove to you that I can change. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild from this. But I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to try. The road ahead seemed impossibly long and filled with too much pain. We'll see, I said, standing up. But for now, I need space. I need time to think. As I walked away from him, I realized that this was just the beginning. The real battle was only starting, and I had no idea where it would lead. Chapter 6, The Distance. The house felt emptier than ever. Even though it was just the two of us, the emotional distance between us made the space feel cavernous. After that painful conversation, I had asked him to leave for a while. I needed time, space, and clarity, things I couldn't find with him around. I had spent the past week in a haze, trying to make sense of my life while teetering on the edge of despair. During the days that followed, I went through the motions, doing my best to maintain a sense of normalcy. But nothing about my life felt normal anymore. My heart was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, love, anger, betrayal, and sorrow all swirling inside me. I took a leave from work, unable to focus on anything but the devastation of my marriage. Friends and family reached out, but I wasn't ready to talk about it with anyone but Sarah. She had been my rock, visiting me almost every day, sitting with me in silence or listening to me rant when the weight of it all became too much to bear. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the house, a familiar thought crept into my mind, the idea of forgiveness. Was that even possible? Could I ever find it within myself to forgive the man who had broken my heart so completely? The love I had for him hadn't disappeared overnight, but it had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Every time I thought of him, I saw those messages, heard his excuses, and felt the sting of betrayal all over again. I tried to picture a future where we could be together again, where we could rebuild what had been lost. But every scenario felt impossible. The trust was gone, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be restored. I had always believed that love was enough to get through anything, but now, I wasn't so sure. As I wrestled with these thoughts, I realized that I needed professional help to navigate this storm. Sarah had suggested counseling more than once, but I had brushed it off, thinking I could figure things out on my own. Now, though, I knew that wasn't the case. I needed someone to help me process everything, to guide me through the complex emotions I was feeling. That evening, I called a therapist who specialized in infidelity and marital issues. It was a small step, but it felt like a significant one. If I was going to find any kind of peace, whether I chose to stay in this marriage or not, I needed to understand my feelings and learn how to heal. The following week, I had my first session. Sitting in the therapist's office, I felt exposed, vulnerable, and unsure of where to begin. But as I started to talk, the floodgates opened. I told her everything about how I had found out, how I confronted him, and how I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. She listened patiently, nodding as I spoke, and when I finished, she said something that stayed with me: forgiveness isn't about erasing the hurt or pretending it didn't happen. It's about deciding whether you want to carry that pain with you for the rest of your life. And sometimes, forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. Her words lingered in my mind long after I left her office. Was that what I needed? To forgive, not for him, but for myself? Could I even do that? For now, I still didn't know. But I realized that forgiveness didn't have to mean reconciliation. It could mean closure, whether or not we stayed together. As I drove home from the session, I felt a little lighter, as though a small part of the weight on my chest had been lifted. I didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in days, I felt like I was moving forward. Little by little, I was starting to see the path ahead.